Most of us would prefer to leave prophecy and prophets in the olden times. It's great that Jesus incorporated words from the prophet Isaiah into his personal mission statement, bringing release to the captives and good news to the oppressed. It's wonderful that Martin Luther King Jr. included quotes from Prophet Amos about a time when justice will roll down like a river and righteousness like a mighty stream. But when someone in modern day times comes up to us and tells us that they have a word from God, God has told them about the future, and then they proceed with a megaphone to stand on the street corners and to shout hellfire and brimstone, we don't think that's so marvelous or wonderful, do we? But the truth is that God does still share prophecy and prophets with us today. It's one of the reasons why our denomination has a tagline that says, never place a period where God has placed a comma. God is still speaking. Sometimes the prophets from their words long ago still impact us in our lives today. I finished reading a book yesterday called Accidental Saints by Nadia Bolz-Weber, a heavily tattooed Lutheran pastor in Denver, Colorado. And she has a church called House for All Sinners and Saints. And in her memoir, she shared about Stephen, who one Sunday came up to the pulpit to read from their sacred text, the prophet Ezekiel. Stephen is a ridiculously successful corporate vice president at their church, a Fortune 500 company guy, looks like a movie star. He also has debilitating depression. He stood in front of friends and strangers on this Sunday and read the following. He brought a single piece of paper up with him that he had written down on to go with the reading of the scripture that day. He admitted in front of everyone that he felt emotionally dead, that for this condition nothing makes a difference. From his paper he read about all the things that make no difference in his feelings of deadness. He claimed no website, no relationship, no Mac computer or iPhone, no exercise, no diet, no supplement, no job, office, or title on my business card, no amount of Diet Coke, good scotch, or bad beer, no self-help book, no therapist or self-recovery group, no car, house, or other status symbol that I can think to buy, no movie or video game, and no matter how truly awesome Doctor Who is, they have all done nothing more than temporarily anesthetize the longing in my soul to be complete, to be whole, to be connected, to be okay, to love, and to be loved, as I am now, with too much weight, too much debt, too much depression, too much gray, too much geek, and not enough of everything else. He says, in my despair that my trip on this rock flying around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour, I fear that this is just some sort of sick joke. But then, he says, I remember the valley of the dry bones. God is talking to the prophet Ezekiel and guides him into something resembling a massive open grave. It's a valley covered from one end to the next with nothing but humanity at its core, which is dry bones. In this valley, there is absolutely no hope of life. And God tells Ezekiel to cry out. Cry out to these dry bones. Cry out to God's children. Tell them to rise up. Tell them to listen to God and rise, and the dry bones listen. And God lifts them up and puts them back together and breathes new life into them, fills them with the Spirit, so that where there once was death and hopelessness and despair, there is now life. And Stephen said, in hearing that, there is light and hope, and that is sufficient. And then he sat down. So this week I was thinking about the types of people that God chooses to share important messages with. So who would be perfect for the reporting and retelling of what the angels had to say about the Christ child? Surely some important dignitary or some wordsmithing author who would get the words just right, or maybe a holy priest, but surely not an outdoor animal caretaker. That's not the right person for this most holy of jobs, right? Shepherds were actually looked down upon because they could not keep the routine of hand washing and other forms of cleanliness rituals that were so important to Jewish law. Also, because sheep do not keep the Sabbath, shepherds could not either. So the shepherds stayed out of town in part because good people would not associate with them. The shepherds were told to look for a ludicrous sign. So imagine the equivalent of a PetSmart employee being told to find God's child wrapped in a sleeping bag, laid in a plastic bin in Walmart. It makes no sense at all. Why would God's child be wrapped in a simple cloth, as the text read? Surely God's child deserves to be wrapped in the most expensive of baby blankets. Why would they find the child lying in a cattle feeding bowl? Perhaps they thought, we'll believe it when we see it, and then they saw it. They astonished everyone by delivering God's message. God continues to show up in unexpected places and employs unusual message givers. Sometimes those message givers are us. God spoke to me more clearly when I was a teenager. I don't know if things were just simpler then and I could just hear better. Maybe life has gotten more complex now, but when I was in the 8th grade, God asked me to deliver a message to my fellow classmate. At the beginning of the first quarter of 8th grade, in our honors algebra class, there was a 7th grader. The 7th grader was so brilliant that he was moved up not just to regular 8th grade class, but 8th grade honors algebra. He was, of course, younger than all of us, and smaller, and way smarter than all of us. By the second quarter, the teachers and his parents decided to move him all the way up to 8th grade, all the way up to all 8th grade honors classes. Unbeknownst to me, unfortunately, some of the boys in our class bullied him and harassed him. Third quarter, he did not show up much for class. I found out years later that he had been institutionalized for depression and dealing with this bullying. By the fourth quarter, he came back to school, and I saw him in the hallway, and I felt God asking me to deliver a message to him. It was so simple. It was just, I'm glad you're back, and I really feel like it's going to be a good rest of the year. I approached him in the hallway, going to lunch, and at first, he recoiled from me. He stepped back, and I was kind of upset about that until I realized that most people were not going up to him in the hallway to give him a nice message. I told him just that. I said, I'm really glad that you're back, and I think that it's going to be a good rest of the year. In the 8th grade, for our lunch period, we would leave our science books open. The bell would ring, we'd go to lunch, come back to our science class, take our books, put them in the locker. That's what happened. This was a Friday. So I took my science book home because I had science homework, and I didn't get around to it until Sunday. And I opened up my science book on Sunday, and I saw a note from him. And it said, thank you for being nice to me. He and I became best friends throughout high school. And it wasn't until 11 years later, when he had flown me out to Hawaii to officiate his wedding, that I had the chance to speak with his mom one-on-one. And she told me what a difference our friendship and that note had made in his life. The note made a difference in my life. But me being asked to deliver a message changed the course of both of our lives. Sometimes the messages that God asks us to deliver are so simple, and they're easy. They're easy to deliver, but not always. Our contemporary reading from Peter Gomes proclaimed that good news to some will inevitably be bad news to others. When Jesus came preaching, it was to proclaim the end of things as they are and the breaking in of things that are to be. The status quo was not to be criticized, it's to be destroyed. There's a prophecy among native tribes called the seventh generation. This speaks of a time thought to be 7 generations after the first contact with Europeans, when indigenous youth and allies of all races will come together to enact a new age of healing and rebirth. Lakota leader Crazy Horse spoke of this vision of his prophecy with Sitting Bull during a pipe ceremony just days before he was murdered. He said, "Upon suffering beyond suffering, the Red Nation shall rise again, and it shall be a blessing for the sick world. A world filled with broken promises, selfishness, and separations. A world longing for light again. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again. In that day, those among the Lakota who will carry knowledge and understanding of unity among all living things, and the young white ones will come to those of my people to ask for wisdom. I salute the light within their eyes, where the whole universe dwells. For when you are at the center within you, and I am at that place within me, we are as one." Those reflecting about the Standing Rock events have said, "Our elders told us stories when we were growing up that someday the 7th generation will come together as one, and we are seeing it happen right now." An unprecedented number of tribes and supporters from around the world and veterans have banded together to protect the land and water from pollution and desecration. Good news to some will almost inevitably be bad news to others. So the good news of protection of God's creation is bad news for some businesses and profit. The good news of folks waking up to injustice is bad news to those who utilize power for personal privilege or ego. The good news of equality for all is bad news for any who prefer to look down on others as less than. Acts chapter 2, 17 through 18 reads, "In the last days, God said, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy." So what good news has God placed on your heart today? Perhaps it's the coming to life of dry bones and deadness. The good news that God is breathing new breath into your life so that no matter how much weight or debt or depression you have, you know that you are loved and that you are created to be loved and to love others. Maybe you have been chosen among all the seemingly more qualified candidates to search out and point towards and announce the next place that God will unexpectedly be born into our world. Whether it's near a cattle food bowl or a Walmart checkout line or any other ludicrous place that we would never think to look for God. Maybe God has placed a simple message of welcome and inclusion on your heart. A loving message that has the power to change a teenager's life and your own. Or maybe God is calling you to be part of the emerging 7th generation prophecy, to take part in Jesus' preaching of the end of things as they are, the breaking in of things that are meant to be. May God's kingdom come and will be done on earth as it is in heaven.